Welcome back to Area DMG. I am your host, Philip Wesley, the Mile High Mouth, and for today's episode of Suki Nihon, we are looking at the Tortured Souls OVA for Corpse Party. C-O-R-P-S-E, Corpse. If it doesn't have an E, it's pronounced core. So I've noticed a lot of people just they just don't understand that. I mean, I've even seen the President of the United States be like, instead of corpseman, I'm like, ugh. But yeah, Corpse Party. Not Core Party, Corpse Party. C-O-R-P-S-E. This episode is called Paths Asunder. This is part 1 of a 4-part OVA. It's available sub-only from Sentai Filmworks on Blu Ray and DVD. Although there's no real good streaming place for it online. Sorry about that. But we're doing this series because of Corpse Party coming to the 3DS for the very first time in the United States. It's also completely uncensored, you know? So yeah, Couple things about this one. There is this really uncomfortable framing device they use where they'll have the, okay, let's pretend that this is the, let me grab something that would be appropriate. Let's pretend that this is your camera, right? All your action happens in here. Some of the camera stuff is like, it starts askew and then just slowly straightens up at the end of a transition. And I was like, oof, that is an interesting narrative device, and I like how they use that. Pretty much what happens here is that there's a bunch of middle school kids, one elementary school kid and a teacher, and they're at the school telling ghost stories and whatnot. And then one of them, since they're moving away, they're like, hey, let's perform a charm for good luck, you know, so we'll be friends forever, etc., etc. So they're performing a charm that ends up accidentally transporting them into a nightmarish closed space. Kind of similar to what you see in the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. A closed space. Or in Spirited Away, where Chihiro ends up in a closed space. This closed space is this closed space. This closed space, wow, that's a tongue twister, sort of, is Heavenly Host Elementary, where a long time ago a young girl named Sachiko died under mysterious circumstances, and now there's a curse on it. And many other atrocities have happened inside this building that they've been transported to. The OVA covers all of the first game, but in its own little way. This particular episode, Paths Asunder, the first episode, recounts how they end up there, and then it recounts the whole Naomi and Psycho storyline. That's the very first chapter of the game. It's pretty exact too. There's a sequence inside of the nurse's room, 2 hallway sequences, a stair sequence, and both of the sequences in the stall, including that weirdly awkward one. And I was like, this one seems to follow the true end scenario from the game. And, Okay, first things first, there's an episode of Steven Universe where I went over Class S relationships inside the video and then partially in the end cap thing. Because if you know, we have those little things after an episode where it's pretty much like a paragraph. But yeah, looking at this, the animation is really good, if not a bit gross and grotesque. But the sound effects are horrific. Just like this really moist squishing and ripping. There's a part in the nurse's room where the character is trying to get away from some kind of specter type thing, and then she gets to the door and there's all this hair that's binding the door together, so she's ripping at it, and I was like, oh god, that sound is awful. Which, by the way, if you've ever played Corpse Party, it kind of prides itself on having binaural sound, which essentially is really 3D kind of sound. You see a lot of ASMR videos that do the whole binaural sound, where you can hear everything. And this does a good job of adding that. So if you're not watching this on a large screen or whatnot, I suggest headphones or a really good sound system, so every gory detail of the sound just, it's kind of like you should invest in headphones if you're going to play the game. Really good headphones and maybe an audio booster or a portable amp so that you'll be able to get a better sound output out of your 3DS. But yeah, the sound is gross. And it translates into the anime really well. There's no dub, sadly, but how would they get people to do this particular dub? A lot of it's like, sounds like it hurts your throat, and a lot of it is just kind of like, it's one of those shows where it is really brutal. Here, let me find another one. It kind of makes me think of stuff like this, where these are good, cute designs and whatnot, but really horrible stuff happens to really young protagonists. To that point, it is in fact a horror anime. And by it being a horror anime, and one of the reasons that we're doing this in October is because that's what it is, it's like, I would say levels of, like Elfen Lied maybe, or some of that stuff. Like, it's got like Higurashi no Koroni type stuff in it, you know? That one's a good one if you're into horror type stuff. That and Boogie Pop Phantom are fantastic. But this one in particular, Corpse Party, especially this first episode, this is almost line for line. Pretty much you're just watching that first chapter of the game put out perfectly. Like you're watching a good Let's Play. And I was like, But let me tell you a little bit about what I look for in horror. I'm kind of one of those people who's a fan of cosmic horror. Or a fan of horror where I mean, I like monster movies and zombie movies, and I do like some of those action type ones, you know. I do like that type of horror, but I kind of prefer horror to have a terror aspect to it, or rather I don't like it when the characters deserve it. I mean, that can have its own stuff. Like, oh, these are really awful characters, and they get ripped apart by beavers, or by like the grabites, or by critters, or whatnot, and that's cool. But I kind of like it if in a horror movie, the victims or the people who are in this horrible situation don't deserve it. I kind of feel better sympathizing with them and feeling that terror for them if they don't deserve what's happening. If it's just that this is just happening because it's just happening. Kind of like, kind of like how we should feel about the victims of war, not the progenitors of it. Progenitors? Progenitors. Progenitors of it. You know, the people who cause it. And I was just like, what happens at Heavenly Host is not the fault of these kids. Although part of Heavenly Host's curse is that it will drive the people in it to be cruel to each other, a bit more brutal to each other. And that's kind of sad. So there's a good amount of good heartbreak here. What happens in this first episode is really unfortunate, and you feel really bad for the characters involved. And as far as horror, that's what works for me. That's what works for me in a horror movie. If it's not deserved, and if it's unfair, if it's hopeless, there can be a little bit of hope, a little bit of that shining candle. These characters are not incompetent, but it kind of feels more horror, or more, the stakes are a bit higher if it's not fair. If they are facing something overwhelming, something that just wants to play, or just thinks they should cut it out. You know what I'm saying? If you've seen or played Corpse Party, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But I'm going to hold my tongue on that one. So yeah, what do you think of this episode? Have you seen this series or this OVA series? Are you interested in seeing this OVA series? Do you love the games? Are you looking forward to the 3DS game? Let me know in the comments below. hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. You know, go ahead and like us. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Go ahead and share if you haven't already. And until the next episode comes out, you are now caught up.